Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons and setting the orientation for a game element correctly as a Dungeon Master. So this is a Dungeon Master tactics video, and specifically I'm going to talk about setting the orientation for a game element. Now, I know that even that's a little abstract. I'm going to use a non-player character as a game element to give a demonstration of how this is done. All right? But I want to talk about game elements really quick. So as a Dungeon Master, right, you are always using game elements. Now, Dungeon mastering is incredibly difficult. This is a very debatable subject. Actually, this is a very debated subject. I think the answer to this is drop dead simple. But there's this big question of whether dungeon mastering is easy and simple. And a lot of people want to tell people, hey, dungeon mastering is easy and simple, right? And the reason why people desperately want to say that to others is we do desperately need dungeon masters. We really do, okay? And so when you tell somebody, hey, this is easy and this is simple, they're far more likely to do it than if you tell them this is incredibly complex and difficult, right? And that's what dungeon mastering is. It's incredibly complex and it's difficult, okay? So, and just to be clear, there's lots of TRPG commentators out there, lots of Dungeons & Dragons commentators out there. I'm a Dungeons & Dragons commentator, and I'm telling you right now, I land in the area where I think it's best to tell people the truth. And dungeon mastering is incredibly complex and difficult, right? And one of the reasons why I think that is, even in order to be a good dungeon master, you have to be creative, savvy, intelligent. It's a lot, right? So what I'm talking about today is reaching deep into how to be a good dungeon master. Okay, all right. And so orientation is one thing we need to pay attention to. All right. So I want to define the term game elements real quick, because as a dungeon master, there's so much to deal with in any given game that you really need to think carefully about your game elements. What are the pieces that you are pulling together in order to make the story you are creating, right? And I have recently I've actually created this myself. It's an acronym, right? And it stands for CLEAR, okay? And as a dungeon master, you should start considering using this, right? To think about how you craft your stories. So let me talk about CLEAR, okay? So CLEAR is an acronym that stands for Catalyst, Location, Entity, Artifact, Relationship. And if you think about it, this is everything you're really dealing with when you're building your stories, okay? Catalysts are your player characters, and they are the catalyst of the story. You need to be thinking about them at all times, okay? Locations are incredibly important to your game. They have to be executed as flawlessly as possible for your game to be done well, okay? Entities are your non-player characters. Entities are people and living creatures and sentient creatures, sentient beings that are not player characters, okay? Artifacts are items, all right? And they don't have to be magical, right? But artifacts are important items, right? Now, a magical item has value, and so that will be, you could consider that an artifact. And I'm also aware that artifact is a reserved word in Dungeons & Dragons. I'm using it at a broader scope right now, right? So artifacts are important items. So a magical item would certainly be, it has high value, it increases the power rate for your player characters, all of that, right? But also think about artifacts like, for instance, a mundane sword that is the sword of a player character's father, right? It has no magical effects, right? But it's the sword of a player character's father, right? That is an artifact, right? In that it has special value. It's not like a regular sword bought from any blacksmith. It's an artifact, okay? And then last is relationships, right? And relationships can be between any of the first four. So there can be a relationship between a catalyst and an entity. There can be a relationship between a catalyst and an artifact. There can be a relationship between a location and an entity, right? The relationships can go in any direction. But you need to be thinking about all of these. You need to think about catalysts, locations, entities, artifacts, and relationships. Okay? So now that I've talked about clear, I want to describe orientation. Orientation for you as a dungeon master, right? You'll see what I mean by orientation in a minute, right? Is going to be for locations, entities, and artifacts, okay? You as a dungeon master will never determine the orientation of a catalyst. You'll never determine the orientation of a player character. That will be determined by a player. But everything I'm talking about today, the orientation of a game element can be applied to a location, an entity, or an artifact, okay? All right. So, at this point, let's proceed forward and I'll explain to you what I mean by determining the orientation of determining the orientation of a game element. All right, so the reason why I'm talking about orientation today is Gunpla. All right, I have recently gotten into a new hobby. It is called Gunpla, which is Gundam plastic models. These are incredibly important. It's an incredibly important industry to Japan. It is, in America, you may have built a model when you were young. Well, Japan takes models very, very seriously, and they make the best in the world. They're like, Gunpla are to plastic models the way Ferrari is to cars, right? They're at a different level, right? And Gunpla is super, and I highly recommend Gunpla. It's incredibly relaxing. It's actually it's fairly cheap for the amount of time it takes to build a model and the enjoyment you get out of it. It's a really good, it's got a lot of bang for its buck as far as a hobby. There's so many things going for Gunpla. It's really, really super fun. It's relaxing. It's cheap. It's engaging. It's multicultural, right? Gunplas are very, very carefully crafted so that they're very accessible to Americans, but they are purely Japanese, right? So kind of multicultural. There's so many great things about Gunpla. And so as I am delving deeper into Gunpla, I am learning things that are directly useful in my Dungeons & Dragons game, right? So one of them is orientation. So as I've been becoming better, and I actually have a mentor. I have a Gunpla mentor, someone who is helping me learn how to create Gunpla as well, right? And so basically, one of the things I learned is when you're building a Gunpla, right? So a modeler building a Gunpla is exactly like a dungeon master building a story, okay? So when you're building a Gunpla, you're going to put that Gunpla together, and at every stage, you need the right part. You need to put that right part into the right place. You need to put that right part into the right place at the right sequence in time, okay? And it's exactly the same with Dungeons & Dragons and with your game elements. You need each one of those game elements, those locations, those entities, and those artifacts. You need to pick the right one, the right part at the right time. You need to put them into the right place, in the right sequence, right? And here's the last part. They have to be orientated correctly. And this is new. This is something that I really didn't think about in my placement of game elements until I did a Gunpla, okay? Now, I recently did a Gunpla, and I built the chest area of the Gunpla. And there is a part that goes at the top of the chest area, and that part was specifically put there so that you just pop the head on, right? Now, the head of the Gunpla, the bottom of the head, has a little ball joint, and that pops right into this part that goes at the top of the chest area that I had already built, right? But when I built this Gunpla, by the way, these models do not use any glue, so you can literally take a Gunpla apart, piece for piece, at any point, and then reconfigure it, which is incredibly helpful, and that all comes from incredibly careful, incredibly thoughtful design from the Japanese, right? All right, so I took this part and I put it in the top of the Gunpla, and sometimes I watch TV when I'm building Gunpla, and I wasn't paying attention the way I should have. I had the right part. It was being put into the right place. It was put in the right sequence, but the orientation was wrong. There was a hole that was supposed to catch the ball joint at the bottom of the Gunpla's head. But I had laid this piece horizontally when it should have been set vertically. The orientation was wrong, okay? And so that's one of the things is once you've built a Gunpla, you start to understand this idea of, as a dungeon master, you are building a story. And when you build that story, you need to put the right part in the right place, in the right sequence, right? And the orientation of that part needs to be correct, all right? Now, everything I've just talked about is abstract, right? And it is, this is a complex I'm presenting an abstract concept, right? So let me give you a practical demonstration of this. All right. So I'm just going to talk about a story, and then I'm going to show you how, as a DM, you would orientate an NPC, a non-player character. All right. Your player characters are fighting some brigands. Your fighter player character, you have a traditional crew. You have fighter, rogue, wizard, cleric. Your fighter is right up in the scrum, clashing blades with other brigands. Your fighter is simultaneously knocked out and knocked off of a cliff into a flowing river, okay? The wizard, the cleric, and the rogue dispatch the rest of the brigands, but it takes them about another 5 minutes, and then, they have to, they rush around, just getting themselves orientated after getting themselves set after the fight, and at that point, it's been like 10 minutes, and when they start looking for, their buddy, player character fighter, right? The fighter has flowed down the river, right? And unbeknownst to the other player characters, the fighter is knocked unconscious, but is picked out of the water by a non-player character. Now, who is this non-player character? Well, this non-player character is the Red Crow, all right? And the Red Crow is a human female bard, 8th level, all right? And the Red Crow pulls your fighter out. Here's what she does, right? She immediately strips him of all of his goods, takes all of his magical items, takes his coin, and takes the special amulet he wears, which is just sentimentally significant, but it's a nice design, right? She takes that, she puts it around her neck, and she realizes that, he's also bleeding and he's hurt very badly, right? So she builds one of those things where it has 2 sticks, and then you drag it behind you. It's like almost like a sled. There's like a term for it. I can't remember what it is. But then she just starts dragging him along, right, to take him to a local village and drop him off at a cleric's temple. She's not even going to pay to have him healed, but she's not going to leave him for dead, right? So she is robbing him, but she's not going to leave him for dead, right? Along the way, she takes the player character's mundane sword and his armor and sells it to two other travelers, right? And she's just moving along. Now, the player characters need to find her, right? And they don't know what direction she went off in, right? But eventually, they do find her, right? And when they find her, they're, simultaneously excited to have found their player character fighter friend, but they're also appalled to see that she's taken all of his gear and sold some of his material, right? So right now, she's a bard, right? So immediately, she's only like a couple miles out from a village from a city. I'm sorry, in D&D, you have villages, you have towns, and you have city. She's taking him to a town where she can drop him off at a cleric temple, right? So she's just a couple miles out of town when they intercept her, and essentially she says, well, she keeps all his gear, right? And they're going to say, hey, well, that belongs to you. She says, I don't know any of you, right? Now it seems like you care for this person, and I will give this person back to you right now if you pay me 200 gold. And that 200 gold is not any type of hostage situation. I'm just saying that I have a plan to take care of this person. Now, the fighter is still unconscious, right? I have a plan to take care of this person, and I need to know that you have the resources to take care of this person, right? So she's going to sell that player character back to the other player characters for 200 gold. That is the first interaction that the player characters have with the Red Crow, right? Now, also I'm presenting this so that you can use it for your game if you like, right? Now, right there, that establishes, well, this chick is different, right? And you want this person you want the Red Crow to be winsome, capable, a little bit dangerous, and a little, mischievous. That's a good word, right? Like she's not gonna let this guy die, but she's gonna rob him of everything, right? So it's a little bit of a Han Solo situation, right? Okay, So, but that's how you establish the red crow. Okay. Later, so that happens. Then there's adventure. 3 adventures. Nothing happens with the red crow, and they don't see her again. Right. Then comes along, and the red crow is found. And the player characters attend a tournament at a baron's like manse, like a small castle. Right. Well, while they're there, enjoying a very nice celebration, as well as, maybe one of them competing in the tournament. But they go and they see these tapestries, right? And they are learning about the Baron, and the Baron has 2 daughters and 1 son, right? And the eldest daughter is there, and the youngest son, and the son is there, but the middle daughter is not there, right? And everybody, you hear that nobody really cares about the middle daughter being gone, and nobody talks about it, except that the mother, the Baron's wife, I think she would be a Baroness, I guess, is very sad, and she very, very much misses the middle daughter. Well, the player characters come into a room. It's got this big tapestry, right? And boom, right there on the wall is the Baron, his wife, his oldest daughter, his youngest child, which is his son. And there's the middle daughter who's missing and not at the tournament, but it's absolutely the red crow. And the player characters are like, oh my gosh, it's the red crow, right? So now they know that she left, the Baron's home, and she she's out making her life as a bard, right? So immediately the player characters have a decision to make. Do they tell the Baroness where her long lost daughter is, and that she's alive and well, and her parents don't even know, because she just was just missing in the middle of the night, and they sent out searchers and all this kind of stuff, right? So the player characters have a decision to make, right? So let's say that the player characters decide that they are not going to tell them, and they decide not to tell the Baron and the Baroness, right? All right. So now you've had 2 interactions with the red crow. Now at that point, right after the tournament, you have adventure, right? So there's 6 adventures splitting since the player characters have seen the red crow last. All right, the adventure, your player characters are commissioned. Actually, they're not commissioned. Sorry, player characters come across an old village. The old village is incredibly disturbed because a will-o-wisp that lives near the village in the forest is now missing, right? And you're like, what? You're upset that a will-o-wisp is missing? And they're like, yeah, it blessed our village, right? And none of our crops are growing, and a whole bunch, and many of the old men and old women are upset. Many of the children are upset, and the reason why is the villagers truly believe that this will-o-wisp blessed their village, right? And then also, in addition to that, they would go talk. They would go talk in the woods to the will-o-wisp, and it would give them wisdom, right? So this will-o-wisp is missing from this village. And one of the player characters is like, I'm getting this will-o-wisp back, right? So they start this investigation on finding the will-o-wisp, and they're like, hey, we got to find this will-o-wisp and handle this situation, right? Well, what ends up happening is they find out that the reason the will-o-wisp is missing is because will-o-wisps have become a new spell component in a brand new spell called Will of the Whip, right? Which is a specific spell that is very powerful and that quite a few wizards are starting to cast, and it actually uses a will-o-wisp as a spell component. And the older the will-o-wisp, the stronger the spell will be, right? Well, this will-o-wisp, they've done investigations on this. The will-o-wisp that's missing from the village is like 600 years old, right? So, at this point, the player characters drive toward finding the will-o-wisp. They chase the will-o-wisp all the way to this huge city. It's a port city, okay? And they find that it's in the lower areas of the city, and they're going there that night to retrieve the will-o-wisp, and they realize that a powerful wizard has sent out an agent. That agent has procured the will-o-wisp and it's about to be shipped that night overseas to this other wizard who commissioned to get this super old will-o-wisp, right? And that the wizard's agent is there in the city, right? Now, at this point, the player characters, there's a huge storm, right? And there's waves that are whipping onto the city, right? And kind of overflowing parts of the city. They're in the lower parts of the city, and there's overflow there. And there's all this water flowing down from the higher points of the city. And so there's a huge flooded area where the will-o'-the-wisp is. The player characters go there, right? They actually see the will-o'-the-wisp has been bound into this intricate glass cage, right? That is reinforced by a small magical spell, right? And it's actually floating on the water, right? But they're and so they've chased it here. But at the same time, there are people down here so there's all this stuff going on, right? And it's in a flooded area of the city. There's dangerous terrain, but they finally found the will-o'-wisp, right? Now, here's orientation. You're going to bring right part is Red Crow, okay? Right place is right here in this part of the city, okay? The sequence is right now is where you reintroduce the Red Crow. But how do you orientate her, okay? Is she one of the victims who is floating along in the water, unconscious, and is now on her way with the water sweeping her away, and she's going to be smashed to pieces in this one area lower down where all these barrels are churning up and just kind of shredding, people who were unconscious victims and are now quickly becoming corpses? Or, so is she someone who needs the player character's help, especially when she earlier actually saved the life of one of the other player characters? Or is she the agent? Is she the agent of the wizard, right? Orientation. This is the right time to introduce the Red Crow, right? Is the agent another person, an obstacle to the player characters, and that by choosing to save the Red Crow, they will actually give opportunity to lose the, and they can absolutely say, so the player characters can absolutely save the Red Crow and maybe return her to her family, or make sure that she's able to live independently away from her family, but save her very life, right? Or and then the wizard's agent is a separate person who will then get the will-o'-the-wisp and escape because they took the time to save the Red Crow. A very a dramatic decision. Or is she the agent and now she's opposed to them, and normally she's a bright shiny bard who will sing a song for you, but right now she's been commissioned to get this will-o'-wisp, and she's going to send this across the seas, right? And if the player characters are going to try to stop her from doing that, she very well may kill one or all of them, right? That is orientation. You have the right part. You're putting it into the right place. You're putting it in the right sequence, but now you have to determine the orientation. So as a game master, when you are building your stories, remember orientation. And I will be paying very, very close attention to how I orient my game elements, my locations, my entities, and my artifacts going forward. And the reason why is because I have been putting together Gunplas. So one, I highly suggest you as a dungeon master use and pay attention to orientation, but then also consider making Gundams, making Gundam plastic models, because it will make you a better dungeon master. I'm really curious of what you think of this idea of making sure you're using orientation correctly. Please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you.